Hey everyone! Tonight we begin with something quiet, eerily quiet. A woman stands at the back of a church while her husband's casket waits at the front. The pews are polished. The air thick with the smell of lilies and wood cleaner. And sunlight from stained glass paints the room in borrowed color. But her eyes aren't on the coffin. They're locked on a woman she's never seen before, crying harder than any widow should have to. You might not survive this one. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I'd love to know. Now, turn off the lights. Maybe let a fan run for some gentle white noise. And let's begin tonight's journey together. Tian. I was standing behind the last pew of the chapel at Willow Creek Baptist, clutching my purse like it might anchor me to the floor. My black dress didn't fit quite like it used to, and a single, neatly folded tissue poked out from the strap, still unused. The place was packed. There were whispers and the occasional sniffle, polite nods from people who half remembered me or weren't sure they should say anything, but no one had asked me to speak. I hadn't been involved in the planning, not even a mention in the printed program. That had been handled by Charlie's partner at the clinic, and our daughter Claire had agreed. She said I needed rest, said I shouldn't be burdened. But I knew the truth. They didn't want me to upset the polished narrative they'd woven around my husband's memory. And yet, he came. I had to know who showed up, who mourned, who took the front row. And that's when I saw her. Front right by long, dark curls that framed a face too young, too perfect, a slim black dress chosen with thought, not grief. She was crying like she'd lost her soulmate. Her whole body shuddered with each breath. A soft white handkerchief fluttered in her fingers. And when the usher leaned in to gently pat her shoulder, he looked at her like she was the widow, like she was me. She never looked back, not once. She just sat there, composed in her chaos, like someone who knew, believed she belonged in that seat. The seat I sat in every Sunday morning for decades, right beside Charles Porter, D. Charlie, my husband. I watched her, not with jealousy exactly, but with a kind of distant, surreal curiosity, like I was watching a movie where I wasn't cast. She looked so devastated, so rehearsed, shoulders curled inward, lips trembling slightly, a woman in mourning. But I was the wife. And yet, I wasn't even mentioned. You know, they say grief comes in waves, but mine felt more like fog, thick, slow, impossible to run from. I hadn't cried since the morning I found out Charlie collapsed in his office. Not even when Claire told me over the phone like she was reading from a script. Not when I cleaned out his sock drawer. Not even when I stood in our kitchen, staring at his coffee mug still half full, still sitting beside the paper. But seeing her Rachel Sterling, I would later learn sobbing into that embroidered linen that nearly broke me. She sat there like she'd earned it, like she had decades under her belt instead of lipstick on his collar. Then, just as the organ music softened and faded into silence, Reverend Miles Grant stepped to the pulpit. I knew that walk. I knew his slow, solemn stride. The same man who married us in 1982, who baptized Claire in a warm porcelain basin, who once called Charlie the most steady soul in Willow Creeks. He adjusted the microphone. I braced myself for a speech that would forget me entirely. But then he looked up, and for a brief second, his eyes met mine, all the way in the back. He gave the faintest nod. Then, into the microphone, his voice calm as rainfall. He said, "Before we begin, Charlie's wife, Elaine, has asked me to share a few words on her behalf." It was like a sound wave rippled through the chapel. Heads turned, dozens of them, slow, deliberate, curious. I could feel the shift. Eyebrows lifted, gasp stifled, and Rachel, yes. Now I knew her name turned in her seat, her mascara-streaked face swiveling toward me. Her mouth parted, her breath caught. And there I stood. Not behind a podium, not in tears, but still holding that purse, still wrapped in silence. Only now I wasn't invisible anymore. I didn't move when Reverend Miles began to speak. I couldn't. My feet felt rooted to the carpet, like the moment had sealed me in place. He spoke gently, made his voice that soft pastoral hum that had carried us through weddings and baptisms and quiet community vigils. But this time, the words he read were mine. Simple, honest, unflinching. He said, Elaine Porter was Charlie's wife for over 40 years. She wanted to say that grief doesn't always wear the loudest face in the room, that love, real love, isn't always the one with flowers or photos or perfectly prepared speeches. Sometimes it's the one that shows up quietly, even when it wasn't invited. No embellishment, no bitterness, just enough. And then, like a whisper passing through wheat, the head slowly turned back toward the pulpit, and the service continued. Rachel didn't look at me again. Not once. But she didn't need to. I had seen everything I needed in that single, stunned glance. She hadn't expected me to be there. That much was clear. She thought the obituary was the final word, the closing curtain, that Charlie's absence had removed me entirely from the narrative. But I wasn't gone. Not yet. You want to know the funny thing about memory? It's never linear. You can stand in a room full of lilies and polite grief, and suddenly, bam, you're back in 1980 on a patchy old sofa in Columbus, Ohio, with your legs folded under you and your heart racing over a boy in scrubs who smelled like cafeteria coffee and hospital-grade soap. That's what happened next. While the church echoed with scripture, my mind slipped. Back to the beginning. Charlie and I met at a university mixer. I was studying early education and wearing a peach corduroy jacket I thought made me look approachable but serious. He was in med school. All elbows and ambition. He said I had sunlight in my voice after I made a joke about state capitals. Corny? Absolutely. But I remembered it. We married 2 years later in a tiny chapel just south of Dayton, white ribbon on the pews, my sister Jo singing a slightly off-key rendition of You Are the Sunshine of My Life that somehow made it even more emotional. Our honeymoon was a borrowed cabin in Lakeview, Michigan, and we felt rich. Charlie worked impossible shifts during residency. I picked up substitute teaching gigs and stretched every grocery dollar like it was made of gold foil. We ate a lot of peanut butter sandwiches. He came home with calloused hands and purple-ringed eyes, and I'd rub his back without him asking. We were young, exhausted, and building something we couldn't yet name. Then Claire came, our only child, our light. Charlie built a pediatric clinic from the ground up in Willow Creek. I went back to teaching part-time and made banana bread every Thursday like clockwork. He always said the smell reminded him of the cabin in Lakeview. I believed him. We had rituals, quiet ones, crossword puzzles on Sunday mornings with mugs of cinnamon coffee. He always tried to beat me. He never did. He'd leave his shoes in the hallway, and I'd move them every single night. And I told myself this is what a long marriage looks like. Love in its worn-in form. And maybe it was. It's strange, isn't it? How the slow erosion of something can be invisible until suddenly the foundation is gone. The warning signs never arrive like sirens. They sneak in like whispers. The first real crack came on Claire's birthday. She just turned 32 and brought over a bottle of Malbec and a new boyfriend named Trevor, whom we were not allowed to interrogate. Charlie grilled steaks. I made lemon bars from scratch. my mom's old recipe. The night was warm. Laughter bounced off the patio walls. For a few hours, everything felt normal, almost like the old days. But later that night, after the dishes were done and the quiet had crept back in, Charlie's phone lit up. It was sitting face up on the table. He didn't see me glance at it. The name on the screen said Jay. The preview read, "Missed you today. Hope you're okay. Call when you can." I was wiping a wine glass dry, and my heart dropped with a thud I could feel in my kneecaps. "Who's Jay?" I asked, as casually as I could. Charlie looked up for half a second. "Just someone from the clinic. She handles scheduling." I repeated, eyebrows lifting. He shrugged. "Jenna. No Rachel. Rachel Sterling. You've met her." I hadn't, or maybe I had. It was getting hard to keep track of the new staff. "She checks in on people sometimes." He added, "Just friendly. You're reading too much into it." His voice was flat, mechanical, like someone had muted the warmth and left only a pre-recorded excuse. I forced a laugh. That's an awfully affectionate message for a work check-in. He didn't reply, just picked up his phone and scrolled with his thumb. That's when I felt it, a kind of tilt inside my chest, like gravity had changed rooms. A part of me, one that had stood beside him for over 3 decades, knew. I didn't know no. Not yet, but I felt it. Something had changed. Here's an academically debatable idea for you. The absence of wrongdoing doesn't guarantee the presence of love. Charlie had never raised a hand, never screamed, never cheated at least. I thought. But slowly, he stopped looking at me like I was his, and that did just as much damage. Later that week, I mentioned a weekend trip, just the two of us. Maybe Lakeview, I said as I poured his morning coffee. Without looking up from his phone, he muttered, "Maybe later." Maybe later became the chorus to every one of my hopes. There's this quirky fact I once read: jellyfish don't have brains. They drift, react, pulse through the ocean, surviving by instinct and current. I felt like that jellyfish sometimes, just reacting, just drifting, no plan, no brain, no anchor. But somewhere in my deep, still core, I was starting to wake up. And that quietly, terrifyingly, was the beginning of everything falling apart. After that night, things between Charlie and me began shifting in small, strange ways, just enough that I started noticing, but not enough to justify a confrontation, at least not yet. His phone was suddenly always face down on the table. He started bringing it into the bathroom, something he'd never done in over 4 decades of marriage. I'd walk into a room and he'd fumble to click it off or minimize whatever was on the screen. Like a kid caught sneaking snacks before dinner. His smile had a delay now, a hesitation, like it had to be summoned instead of surfacing naturally. I pretended I didn't see any of it. Because sometimes, preserving the illusion feels safer than asking for the truth. That's a trick I think a lot of women learn how to play blind without ever closing our eyes. So I did what I thought I was supposed to do. I tried harder. I cooked his favorite meals, chicken with rosemary and lemon, pot roast with extra carrots. I ironed his shirts before he asked. I even started wearing lipstick again. A soft rose shade I hadn't touched since Claire's graduation. He didn't notice, or if he did, he said nothing. One morning, I brought up the idea of a weekend getaway again somewhere small, a cozy cabin. We had gift certificates we hadn't used in years. We could drive up to Lakeview, just you and me, like old times. Charlie didn't look up from his tablet. "I've got too much going on at the clinic," he mumbled. "Maybe later." There it was again, that phrase, "maybe later." It had become his version of no's. Then, I remember the first time I truly doubted him. It was late on a Thursday. He came home around 9:30. Said he'd been at the clinic for a last-minute emergency consult. His tie was loosened, his shirt wrinkled in a way that didn't match a normal workday. I hugged him, like I always did. That's when I smelled it. Not antiseptic, not hand sanitizer, something floral. Faint, but unmistakable. It wasn't my perfume, and it sure as hell wasn't his. I pulled back just slightly. New air freshener at the clinic, I asked, trying to sound light, almost teasing. He looked confused. What? You smell like jasmine or something sweet. He blinked. Oh, must be the waiting room. Rachel lights those scented candles. Right, I said, smiling too hard. Candles. He went upstairs. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the drawer where I kept our old grocery lists and takeout menus. I opened it, found nothing I needed, and closed it again. It wasn't the smell that haunted me. It was the way he answered. Too casual, too clean. Over the next few days, I kept trying to be the version of myself he might want again. I bought new bed sheets, a soft linen blend in charcoal gray cool to the touch, with a texture that whispered luxury. He didn't comment on them, not even when I pointed out how nice they felt. I even baked banana bread, 2 loaves. He took 1 bite, said it was a little too sweet, and tossed the rest. Fun fact, bananas release more sugar the riper they get. Maybe I was hoping he'd find comfort in the overripe. Maybe I was hoping he'd find comfort in me. And then came the email. It happened by accident. I had left my phone in his office by mistake and walked in to grab it. His laptop was open, screen glowing. He'd left his inbox up. I wasn't snooping. Truly, I just looked. There, near the top, was a confirmation email for a hotel reservation in Hudson Valley, New York, a boutique resort known for its couples packages, spa treatments, hot tubs, sunset wine tastings, our kind of place, or me what used to be. I stared at the subject line for a long time. He'd never mentioned any trip, not for us, not for anyone. Later that night, I asked carefully, Hudson Valley. Sounds romantic. He looked up from the couch. Oh, someone at the clinic mentioned it. I looked it up out of curiosity. That's all. No blink, no pause. Just a lie smooth as butter on warm toast. I didn't press. What would I even say? You can't accuse someone of infidelity over browser history, at least not when they've spent decades convincing you they're incapable of betrayal. That night, I lay in bed while he scrolled on his tablet, our new sheets cool against my skin. He turned away from me, the glow of the screen casting shadows across the wall. I reached out, lightly placed my hand on his shoulder. He didn't flinch, didn't react, just kept scrolling. Well, I read once that lobsters don't die of old age. They just molt and grow and molt again until their shells can't keep up, and then one day, they simply stop. That's what our marriage felt like. 1,000 quiet molts, 1,000 versions of me he'd stopped recognizing, until all that was left was a woman in a linen nightgown with her hand hovering over a man who no longer saw her. I missed the version of Charlie who used to kiss me on the forehead every morning before leaving for work, who once spent a whole afternoon helping Claire build a diorama of the solar system, only to drop it on the garage floor and start over again without complaint. I missed the man who made a terrible pun every time he sliced watermelon. But that man was fading. And in his place stood someone cooler, smoother, controlled, and secretive. One night, as I was folding laundry, I found a receipt in his jeans pocket, a restaurant we'd never been to, 2 entrees, wine, dessert, a place with artisan in the name. He hated that word. The tip he left was generous. Too generous. I stared at the ink for a while before tucking the paper back into his pocket, folding the jeans, and placing them in his drawer like nothing happened. I wanted to confront him. Lord, I did. But confronting him meant ending the story we'd built, and I wasn't ready to live in a world where I was no longer a wife. So I let the truth sit in my chest like a stone in a river, heavy, permanent, and slowly reshaping everything around it. I remember the morning I gave up trying to make things feel normal. It wasn't some dramatic breaking point. No slamming doors or screaming matches, just eggs. Scrambled eggs, to be specific. I'd gotten up early, beat the yolks with a splash of cream the way Charlie liked, added fresh chives from the windowsill planter, toasted sourdough, bacon crisp just right. I even folded the napkins. He walked into the kitchen, already dressed, no good morning, just a scroll through his phone, half listening to a podcast as he slid into the chair. I poured his coffee, set the plate down. He glanced at it. I'm not hungry. That was it. Not a thank you, not even a glance at the effort. He grabbed his keys and left. I sat down at the table and stared at his untouched plate, steam still curling from the eggs like a question mark. Then I picked up the fork and ate them myself, every bite, because I was done feeding someone who never looked up. Later that week, I suggested we go for a walk just around the block. It was early fall in Willow Creek, the leaves burning gold and rust, my favorite time of year. I'm tired, he said. My back hurts. The next night, it was his knees. By the third rejection, I stopped asking. I started walking alone, 10 minutes, 15, past the Carmichael's lawn gnomes, under the old maple that dropped leaves like confetti. Sometimes I imagined I was widowed already, not by death, but by absence. It felt oddly accurate. That's when the dreams started. Not nightmares, exactly, but dreams where I'd find myself in our house, alone. Except it wasn't our house anymore. Everything looked the same, but all the photos on the walls had changed. I wasn't in them. Rachel was, laughing with Charlie at Christmas, sitting in my seat at Claire's wedding, even wearing my old pink cardigan. I'd wake up sweating, unsure where I was. I started journaling again, not for therapy or anything dramatic, just scraps, half-thoughts, observations. Charlie didn't eat the chicken. Charlie didn't say goodnight. Charlie smelled like soap that isn't ours. One entry read, "My shadow is more affectionate than my husband." I underlined it twice, then closed the notebook and shoved it in the back of the drawer. There's an old saying, you don't feel the ground shift until your knees hit the floor. It's true. The moment I hit mine, the hospital fundraiser. Charlie insisted I come. He even bought me a new dress, navy blue, modest, lace sleeves, a little pearl clasp at the neck. It wasn't really my style, but I wore it anyway. For him, the Willow Creek Regional Fundraiser was held at the Marriott downtown, a chandelier ballroom, long tables with name cards, shrimp cocktails trying too hard to be fancy. Charlie worked the room like a politician, handshakes, grins, compliments so smooth I wondered who taught him that language. I walked behind him, smiling politely, clutching my little evening bag like it was a security blanket. Then he introduced me. "This is Elaine," he said to a board member, my wife. That pause, that tiny hesitation, it lodged itself in my ribs. Not my lovely wife, or "This is Elaine." We've been married 40 years, just Elaine, like I was a woman who happened to share his address. And then she arrived. Rachel Sterling. She wore deep burgundy, the kind of dress that walks into a room 2 seconds before you do. Her lipstick matched it exactly. Her heels tapped across the marble like punctuation. "Doctor? Porter?" she said with a warm, rehearsed smile. She touched his arm, not a handshake, a slide from wrist to elbow, familiar, intimate. "You made it." He smiled back. That real smile, the one I hadn't seen in months, maybe years. I wouldn't miss it, he said. I stood beside him, invisible. I could have burst into flames and no one would have blinked. Rachel laughed, touched his lapel. "You always forget this," she teased, straightening a button like she'd done it 100 times. Oh, I said nothing, just stood there like the coat rack. They chatted about table assignments, donor gifts, who was sitting next to whom, little inside jokes thrown like confetti between them. I smiled when appropriate, nodded when needed. Then someone across the ballroom called Charlie's name. Rachel offered to check on the seating chart, and off he went, trailing behind her like a dog. I ended up near the dessert table, sipping sparkling water I didn't want. A woman I vaguely recognized came over. "You must be so proud of Charlie," she said. "He and Rachel have been working so closely. She's really been a rock for him through everything." A rock? I smiled. She certainly has. Then I excused myself and found the valet. Rode home alone, in the dress he chose, in heels that pinched. My body felt like an afterthought. Back in the kitchen, I opened a bottle of red and poured a glass, not to celebrate, not even to numb, just to feel something sharp again. Charlie came home nearly 2 hours later, kissed the top of my head like I was an aunt he hadn't seen in a while. He said, "The fundraiser went well," and disappeared upstairs. I didn't cry that night, but something inside me did crack, like a window that had held back years of wind. I realized I hadn't lost Charlie that night. I'd lost him long ago. I just hadn't let myself admit it until now. You don't unravel all at once. You come undone, stitch by stitch. After that gala, I stopped pretending. No announcement, no angry speech, just quiet changes. I stopped making Charlie's favorite meals. If I cooked, it was something I liked: spicy soups, egg salad with too much paprika, breakfast for dinner with crispy hash browns and hot sauce. I started eating earlier, alone at the table, with one candle lit and the radio low, a little jazz station out of Lansing that played Ella Fitzgerald at night. He'd come home late, glance in the fridge, and microwave leftovers. We didn't talk about our days. We didn't talk about anything. We were roommates with paperwork. One Tuesday afternoon, he called. I remember because I was in the middle of clipping the dead heads off my potted roses. His voice was calm, almost casual. "I'm going to stay at the apartment near the clinic for a bit," he said. There was no discussion. It wasn't a question. It was a logistics update. I didn't even know we had an apartment near the clinic. For how long, I asked, trying not to let my voice tremble. "Just a few weeks. Things are busy. Easier than commuting." "Right," I said, trimming another wilted bloom. Easier. That night, I helped him pack. Folded his shirts the way he liked, rolled socks into perfect little cylinders, polished the pair of shoes he wore to speaking engagements, even zipped his toiletry bag neatly, tucking in the razor and floss picks he never remembered to replace. He didn't touch me, no hug, no kiss goodbye. He left with the same suitcase I had given him for our anniversary back in '98, the one we never used for our trip to Seattle. I stood in the doorway after he drove off, the taillights disappearing down our quiet street. Then I turned around and cleaned the kitchen, not because it needed it, but because I couldn't sit in the silence just yet. "Tim." Claire called 2 days later. I didn't tell her. She was busy some work deadline, a vacation she was planning with her boyfriend. She chatted about beach rentals and her dog needing a new harness. I listened, nodded along. smiled even. I told her Charlie was working late as usual. It felt easier than the truth, easier than explaining how the man she admired had packed a bag and walked out like it meant nothing. I moved into the guest room that week. Our bedroom still smelled like him, like cedar and shaving cream, and that subtle hint of betrayal I couldn't yet name out loud. I stripped the sheets, washed them twice, and folded them tightly into the linen closet like I was trying to contain the memories inside the cotton. The guest bed was firm, clean, anonymous. A blank slate. Nah. That's when the mail started piling up. I stopped opening envelopes, electricity bills, clinic newsletters, credit card statements. They sat on the foyer table in a quiet stack. Unopened, I'd glance at them on my way to the kitchen, then turn away like they were someone else's problems. I stopped watering the garden, too. The roses browned, the lavender drooped. I let the wildflowers overtake the path. I didn't care. I was too busy existing in this new quiet that had swallowed the house. Even the neighbors noticed. Mrs. May Avery across the street dropped off a casserole one evening, something with peas and tuna and too much salt. "You've been on my mind," she said, voice low and hesitant, just in case you needed something. I thanked her, let the dish sit in the fridge for 3 days before tossing it. My rock bottom didn't look cinematic. There was no sobbing on the kitchen floor or throwing glass against the wall. It was standing in the pantry, eating dry toast over the sink for dinner, realizing I hadn't spoken to another human being in 2 full days. It was brushing my teeth and catching my reflection hair unbrushed, shirt inside out, shoulders curved in like I was trying to disappear. I whispered to myself, "This isn't me." Not as a declaration, as a question. Because I didn't know who I was anymore without Charlie, without the title of wife, without the rhythm of taking care of someone else. I had been a background character in my own life for so long that when the main act left, all I had were shadows and static. And then came the package. It was a gray Wednesday morning, raining, that soft drizzle that makes the whole world feel like it's been dimmed to 60%. I was still in my robe, sipping lukewarm tea in the living room, flipping through an old book I didn't really want to read. The knock at the door startled me. Firm, businesslike. A FedEx courier stood outside, holding a padded envelope. "Elaine Porter," he asked. I nodded. "Signature here, please." I signed. He handed it over and walked away without a second glance. There was no return address, just a scribbled name in the corner, Charles Porter. My heart sank. I brought it inside, sat at the dining table, and stared at it for a long time. The rain tapped gently against the window, steady and slow. I didn't want to open it, but I did. Inside was a slender jewelry box, the kind you get from boutique shops, pale blue velvet, with a tiny silver clasp, and a card. Not a folded card, just a square of thick, cream-colored paper. The handwriting wasn't mine. "To the woman who gave me peace when I thought I'd never find it, I love you. See." My stomach turned. I opened the box. A gold necklace. Delicate, a heart-shaped pendant, outlined in tiny rubies. Across the center, in swirling cursive, a single engraved word, Rachel. I didn't gasp. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just froze. The weight of it sat in my palm like a truth I'd always suspected but never dared to touch. He had chosen a gift, written a note, planned a moment for her 2 days before he died. And somehow through irony or accident or maybe something divine, it ended up in my hands instead. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It had a shape, a shine, a name. The heart-shaped pendant sat in my palm, its tiny rubies catching the gray morning light. It glittered like something sacred, precious, romantic. But it wasn't meant for me. It wasn't mine. And yet, here it was delivered to my doorstep like a cruel joke, like a late-arriving punchline to a marriage I didn't realize had been the setup. I set it down gently on the dining room table beside the card, as if it might explode. My hands were trembling, my breath shallow. I couldn't stop staring at the engraving. Rachel. I said her name aloud, just once, to see how it felt in my mouth. It tasted like iron. Then I stood up, walked to the kitchen sink, and splashed cold water on my face. I leaned over the basin, dripping, gripping the edges, trying to keep my knees from giving out. I didn't cry. Not then. Yeah. I wandered the house like a ghost for the rest of the day. Everywhere I looked, I saw pieces of the life I thought we'd built our wedding photo on the mantle. That goofy picture of us at the Grand Canyon with Claire perched on Charlie's shoulders, the mug he used every morning. World's best dad. Chipped at the rim but still holding its title. The worn groove in the couch cushion where he sat every evening with his feet up. It all looked staged now, artificial. A museum exhibit labeled Midwestern Marriage 1982 to 2024. I couldn't stop wondering how long it had been going on. Had it started at the clinic over coffee, casual smiles turning into shared secrets? Had she known he was married, or did she just not care? No, that wasn't fair. She knew. She sat in the front pew like she'd rehearsed it, like she expected to be honored. But the part that gutted me the most wasn't her. It was him. Charlie had planned this. He'd picked out the necklace. He'd written that note. He gave her poetry when I hadn't gotten a birthday card in 5 years. See, I checked the postmark on the package. Sent 2 days before his death. 2 days before his heart gave out in that pristine little office at Willow Creek Clinic. That meant he'd spent his final living moments thinking of her. Not me. Not Claire. Not the woman who clipped coupons so he could finish med school, who drove him to ER shifts in the snow, who held his hand in the ICU when he thought he had a tumor in 2003, who packed his lunch and left notes in his coat pocket like a teenage crush, even in our 60s. He chose her. And somehow, in the twist of fate, only the universe can write. I got her necklace. A parting gift from a man I thought I knew. I didn't bury it right away. Instead, I placed the jewelry box in the junk drawer. You know, the one full of old batteries, dried up pens, rubber bands, expired coupons, a key that opens something you can't remember. I set it beneath the stack of takeout menus and masking tape rolls and shut the drawer with a little more force than necessary. I wasn't ready to throw it away. Not yet. I needed it there. Like a bruise I kept pressing just to remember where it hurt. That night, I sat in the dark with only the reading lamp on. I pulled out one of my old journals back from when Claire was in high school, when I still believed Charlie just worked too hard, when I still thought distance meant dedication. I flipped through the pages and found an entry from our 25th anniversary. He's been quiet lately, distant, but I'm trying not to read into it. I think I just want him to look at me the way he used to. I bought a new dress. He said it was nice. I miss the way he used to reach for my hand without thinking. Even then, I'd been erasing the truth in real time, covering the cracks with fresh paint. He hadn't grown distant overnight. It wasn't Rachel that broke us, not entirely. It was the slow, consistent erosion, the kind that takes years, the kind you ignore until one day you realize the shoreline is gone and all you've got left is wet sand and a vague idea of what used to be. The necklace wasn't a bomb. It was confirmation. a glittering period at the end of a sentence I'd been too afraid to read. The next morning, I made coffee. Not for two, just for me. Strong, 1 sugar, a splash of oat milk, and cinnamon. Charlie always hated cinnamon, said it made coffee taste like dessert. I added extra. After breakfast, I walked into our closet. His side was still full, dress shirts, the navy suit he wore to hospital board meetings, the ratty gray hoodie he loved too much. I ran my hands along the hangers. Then I got to work. One by one, I folded his clothes into boxes. I didn't cry. I didn't smell them or cradle them or sit down on the floor surrounded by fabric. I just folded. Shirts, socks, slacks. His cologne, his ties, the cufflinks I gave him for his 50th birthday. Each item into a bag labeled donate. It felt like pulling weeds, necessary, methodical, therapeutic. Now, at the very back of the closet, I found a shoebox. Inside were ticket stubs from medical conferences, handwritten thank you cards from patients, and a few old birthday cards from me. One said, "To my rock, I couldn't do any of this without you." I stared at it for a long time, trying to remember who that woman was, trying to decide if he ever really was that man. I slipped it into the recycling bin. Then I laced up my sneakers and went for a walk. It wasn't dramatic, just around the block, my usual route. But I walked slowly, deliberately, like I was learning how to move in my body again. I passed Mrs. Mon Lewis, knitting on her porch. She waved. I waved back. For the first time in months, I didn't feel embarrassed to be seen alone. When I got home, I pulled out a blank notebook, one I'd bought years ago, still wrapped in plastic. I unwrapped it, opened to the first page, wrote a single sentence. I'm still here. Then I closed it, set it on the counter, and lit a candle. Not for grief, for myself. That evening, I opened the junk drawer, took out the necklace. It still shimmered, as if mocking me. I held it for a long minute. Then I walked into the backyard, barefoot, the grass cool under my feet. The air smelled like dry leaves and damp soils. I knelt down at the rose bush Charlie had promised to replant 5 years ago. He never got around to it. I dug a small hole with my hands, pressed the necklace inside, covered it with soil. No ceremony. No prayer. Just a quiet goodbye to something that was never mine. That night, I slept with the window open. Let the breeze in. Let the silence settle. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt the ache start to fade. Not gone, but quieter. The days that followed weren't revolutionary. There was no music montage, no suddenly radiant Elaine dancing barefoot in the kitchen, just smaller moments, quieter ones. I started standing taller without meaning to. I began answering calls instead of letting them go to voicemail. I called Jo, my sister, back after ignoring her for 3 days. We talked about something stupid, whether or not squirrels remember where they bury their nuts. They don't. Apparently, they just sort of guess based on smell. I laughed, out loud, and it felt like blowing dust off an old piano key. One afternoon, I pulled out my sketchbook, the one Claire gave me 3 Christmases ago. It still had the tag inside the cover for when you finally have time for yourself. I sharpened a pencil, drew my coffee cup. Then the rose bush. Then a single heart buried beneath the soil. I didn't try to be good. I just let the lines come out however they wanted. No one was watching. That felt new. There's an odd wisdom that sneaks in after 60. You stop waiting for someone to give you permission to be yourself. So, I didn't ask permission. I called Denise Carrington, my lawyer, and scheduled a meeting. I'd like to update my will, I told her when I walked in, shoulders squared, and removed Charles's name from everything. She didn't blink, just pulled out a fresh folder and said, "Let's get started." In an hour, I had rewritten my future. Left everything to Claire, with a small amount set aside for a scholarship in my name, Elaine Porter, for students who loved books and hot tea and taking care of everyone but themselves. I told Denise there was a box of letters in my closet. Some were mine. Some were Charlie's, from decades ago. They weren't dramatic, but they were personal. If anything happened to me, I wanted Claire to have them. Unopened. I said, let her decide what to do with them. Denise nodded. I signed the paperwork. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I'd made a choice entirely for myself. I started making a list. Not a bucket list. I'm not that dramatic. Just a list titled, "What if I did anyway?" Go back to book club. Try that lemon meringue recipe I never mastered. Learn how to use that stupid fancy camera Claire got me. Organize the pantry. Say no without explaining it. Say yes without permission. And then I looked at the clinic. I hadn't been back since Charlie's memorial. But late one evening, with a glass of wine and too much scrolling, I ended up on the Willow Creek Pediatric website. There she was, Rachel Sterling, executive coordinator. Smiling, confident, posed in a tailored dress in front of a bookshelf she probably hadn't read a thing off of. It didn't sting as much as I expected. I looked at her photo the way you look at a thunderstorm through double-pane glass. You can hear it, see it, but you know it can't touch you anymore. Still, curiosity pulled at me. So I called Tom Adler, Charlie's accountant. We'd met once or twice at fundraisers. He was polite, precise, the kind of man who kept a pen in his shirt pocket even at dinner. "Tom," I said after a moment of small talk, "I need to know what's going on with the clinic, legally, financially." He hesitated, but just slightly. "You have a right to know," he finally said. "Let me pull a few things together." A few days later, I sat across from him in his office, a cup of bad coffee warming my palms. "There are some irregularities," he said, flipping open a folder. Inside receipts, spa charges, jewelry purchases, a flight and hotel reservation to Hudson Valley, all charged to the clinic. None filed properly. All signed off by Rachel Sterling. He continued, "Technically, she was never officially on payroll. Elliot never filed her contract properly. She's been volunteering, at least, on paper." My mouth dropped slightly. She's not owed severance. She's not legally employed. I blinked. Then why is she still there? He shrugged, gently. Until now, no one was authorized to change anything, but with the will executed, you're the sole decision maker. The weight of it sat between us. "You can let her go," he said quietly, "or press charges." I stared down at the evidence. So much energy, so many lies. So much effort for a woman who never even got a wedding ring. I shook my head. "No charges," I said. "Just get her out, quietly, clean." He nodded. "It'll be done." 2 days later, she was gone. No scene. No confrontation. Just a private meeting, followed by a quiet escort out the back door. Her name was removed from the clinic website before sunset. I didn't show up, didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The wind had shifted, and this time, it was at my back. I sat with that for a while. Not the power, not even the justice. The stillness. There's a moment after a storm passes where the leaves are still dripping, the ground soaked, but everything else feels clean, a little bruised, but clearer. That's where I was. And I realized I didn't want the clinic. Not anymore. Too many ghosts in the paint. Too many lies soaked into the drywall. So I found someone who did. Duh. There was a small group of young women doctors, bright, warm, full of hope. They'd been trying to open a family care practice but kept hitting financial walls. I met with them, listened, watched the way they lit up when they talked about community medicine and inclusive care. I sold them the entire clinic for $1. They cried. I didn't. It's not charity. I told them, it's a clean start. Just use it well. No. The day the papers were signed, I stood in front of the building one last time. The old sign still said Porter Pediatrics, but it wouldn't for long. I ran my fingers across the brick, then turned and walked away. Not broken, not victorious, just free. Claire showed up unannounced the following Saturday. I was in the backyard, watering the peace lily that Charlie used to forget existed. It had wilted last year when he was too busy to help with the plants, but somehow it had survived. Like me, she knocked gently, even though the back gate was wide open. Mom. I turned, garden gloves on, hair pulled back, the hose still hissing quietly. She looked different, not unkempt, just soft, less guarded. I didn't know if I should call, she said, stepping into the yard, but I didn't want to wait anymore. I turned off the hose. Want some iced tea? She nodded, almost too quickly. We sat at the patio table beneath the big maple tree, the one Charlie had once promised to trim but never got around to. Claire held her glass like it was a microphone and stared into it for a long time. Then I didn't know things were that bad. I didn't look away. Most people didn't. She blinked quickly, like she was trying not to cry. I thought he was just working too hard, getting older. You know how he always got in that tunnel? He was in a tunnel, I said softly, but I wasn't in it with him. She nodded, her jaw tensed. Did you know about Rachel? I hesitated, not everything, but enough, before he died. Claire rubbed the back of her neck. Why didn't you tell me? I looked at her, really looked. She was my baby, the girl who once refused to eat crusts, who built elaborate Lego villages and gave every doll a full backstory. Because you loved him, I said, and I didn't want to taint that. Her eyes filled, but I could have helped. You didn't have to go through it alone. A long pause stretched between us, the kind that's heavy but necessary. I think I needed to, I finally said, to know I could. Claire leaned back in her chair, staring up through the tree branches. You seem different. I am. She studied me again, like she was seeing a version of me she hadn't met before. You seem lighter. I buried some things, I said, half smiling. Literally. I nodded, under the rose bush. She laughed, then blinked. Wait, seriously. I grinned. Not him, just what he left behind. Yasho. We talked for hours. Not about Charlie, not entirely. About her work, her dog, a podcast she liked about cults and cold cases. She told me about Trevor, how they broke up. He never asked how my day was. She said, fiddling with her glass. Now I realize that matters more than I thought. I nodded. That's how it starts. We didn't try to rewrite the past. We didn't cry dramatically into each other's shoulders. We just sat in the garden while the sun dipped behind the garage, and a single hummingbird buzzed near the hydrangea bush. That was enough. Mom. After she left, I stood in the yard for a long time. The rose bush had started to bloom again, full, unapologetic petals, deep red like something out of a fairy tale. You'd never guess a necklace was buried beneath it. But I knew, and I liked that. There's something oddly comforting about secrets kept with dirt and roots. You don't have to speak them. You just let them feed the soil and make something new. Over the next few weeks, I started rearranging the house. I moved the couch to where it caught more light, took down the heavy curtains in the living room and replaced them with soft linen panels, donated the last of Charlie's books, the ones he never read but kept for show. I repainted the bedroom, pale blue, calming. The guest room became my room now. Not because I was hiding, because it was mine. Every morning, I made tea and walked to the rose bush, just to say hello, not to Charlie, not even to Rachel's necklace, to the part of me that had started growing again. One morning, while brushing my hair, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. Not just my reflection, but me, not a wife, not the woman Charlie left behind, just Elaine. Hair streaked with silver, eyes soft but steady, shoulders pulled back, like someone who had finally remembered how to take up space. I smiled, not because I looked younger or stronger, but because I finally looked honest. Yeah, that afternoon, I went to the bank, updated every account, removed Charlie's name from anything still connected to my name, rerouted my pension, closed the joint savings account we hadn't touched in years. The banker kept calling me Mrs. Baez Porter until I finally said, "Just Elaine is fine." She smiled like she understood. Maybe she did. Next came the pantry. I alphabetized the spices, threw out anything expired, donated the 5 cans of green beans I never liked but kept because Charlie insisted they were staples. I started buying new things. Herbal teas, almond biscotti, frozen pot stickers, granola that didn't taste like birdseed. No one to impress. Just me. Bow. And I started writing again. Not big essays or poetries. Just moments. Like the time Charlie dropped a cake at Claire's 2nd birthday and we all ate it off the floor anyway. Or the night Claire snuck into our room with a nightmare and Charlie pretended to chase the monster out with a sock puppet. I wrote those things down. Not for forgiveness. For preservation. Because you can mourn a person and still protect the parts of them that mattered. No, I never told Claire about the necklace. Some things belong to the past. Others bloom into the future. She texted me a few days later. "Claire, hey, next weekend, want to help me plant something in your garden? Me only if we name it. Claire deal, you pick the name." I stared at the screen and thought for a moment, then typed, "Me resilience." She sent back a heart emoji. The roses are blooming. The soil is soft. And I'm finally ready. Not for love, not for closure. For myself. I didn't need a grand declaration to feel whole again. I just needed choices. Small ones. Intentional ones. That Sunday morning, I sat at the kitchen table with the windows open. The air smelled like sun-warmed earth and coffee. A soft breeze drifted through the screen. Stirring the edges of the newspaper, I wasn't really reading. And for once, I wasn't waiting on anyone to join me. I was already enough. Then, later that afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to the library. Not to return books, not for a quiet corner to cry in, like I had a few times when Charlie was gone late and I couldn't bear to sit in our silent house. This time, I walked in like I belonged. I signed up to volunteer. The woman at the desk, Cheryl, short gray bob and bright green glasses, smiled when I asked about helping with story hour. We could always use someone who still knows how to read upside down, she joked. I laughed. I taught first grade for 15 years. I've got upside down reading and goldfish cracker negotiations in my skill set. She wrote my name on the sign-up sheet in big bubbly letters, Elaine P. It felt right. Not Mrs. Porter. Not the widow. Just Elaine. That evening, I pulled out the box of old photos and started sorting. Claire as a toddler in her inflatable ducky pool, Charlie, shirtless, wearing socks with sandals, something we teased him about for years, me in my homemade Halloween costume as a garden gnome. I labeled every photo, not with flowery language or long backstories, just the facts. Names, dates, places. Because one day, someone might need to know where the memory came from. And this time, I wasn't going to disappear from the story. The next day, I met up with Jo at a cafe downtown. She ordered her usual black coffee and a croissant. I got something called a turmeric latte that looked like it belonged on an Instagram story. "You've got color in your cheeks again," she said, poking her fork at me. "And what is this sweater? You look like you're about to read poetry in a Brooklyn loft." "It has pockets," I said, smugly. She grinned, color me impressed. We didn't talk about Charlie, not at first. Instead, we talked about Jo's new neighbor who kept parking half on her lawn, about the raccoon that had made a temporary home in her chimney. But eventually, the subject circled. "He really did a number on you," she said, not unkindly. I stirred my latte. "Yeah," I admitted, "but I don't carry it the same anymore." Jo reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her rings clicked against the ceramic mug. "I'm proud of you," she said. And for the first time, I believed it. There's this academically debatable theory that our personalities change every 7 years. Cellular turnover, life stages, whatever you want to call it. I don't know if I buy it, but I do know this sometimes. The version of you that survives isn't the same one that loved. And that's okay. I started noticing things I'd ignored for years. The way the neighbor's wind chimes played an accidental melody every time the mail truck passed, the humming sound the fridge made when it was about to die, and how it finally didn't. The fact that my favorite tea actually wasn't the one Charlie bought in bulk, but a citrus blend I'd tried on a whim and loved immediately. I realized I had taste again. Not his, mine. Claire came by with gardening gloves and a hopeful grin. We spent hours digging, pulling weeds, planting marigolds and a new lilac bush in the corner. "Resilience," I said, pointing to it. That's her name. Claire wiped sweat from her brow. She's going to be dramatic. I can feel it. Just like her mother? We laughed until our cheeks hurt. Down. Later, we sat on the porch drinking lemonade. Claire leaned back, letting her head fall against the wooden swing. "Did you ever think you'd feel okay again?" she asked. I thought for a moment. "No," I said honestly, "but I do now, and that's enough." She looked over at me with something like awe. And I saw it clearly then how we'd both changed, how pain didn't just hurt us. It shaped us, sharpened us, but it didn't ruin us. That night, I took a bath with lavender oil and an overpriced candle I would have rolled my eyes at last year. I listened to old jazz on my Bluetooth speaker and let the water turn cold before I got out. No one to rush for. No one to check on. Just me. Here's a quirky fact for you. The color blue lowers your heart rate. Painters use it to create calm. Hospitals use it in waiting rooms. Maybe that's why I picked it for the bedroom. Or maybe I just wanted to feel peace when I opened my eyes in the morning. Whatever the reason, it worked. Because I'd wake up and, for a second, forget what had happened. And then I'd remember and it didn't sting anymore. It just was like a book I'd finished, still on the shelf, but no longer open. That, I never told anyone about the necklace. Not Joe, not Claire, not even Cheryl at the library, though I suspect she could smell a good story a mile away. It's still buried beneath the rosebush, still wrapped in soil and silence. And that feels right. Because some chapters don't need an audience. They just need an ending. The wind rustled the curtains as I wrote in my journal that night. I'm not the woman I was when Charlie left. I'm better. Not in a spiteful way, not in a revenge way, in a true way. Because for the first time in decades, I belonged to myself. And I wasn't about to give that away again. The day of Charlie's funeral arrived like a bad weather front quiet, inevitable, and full of tension that hummed beneath everything. I hadn't been part of the planning. That role, conveniently, had gone to Rachel, who somehow held power of attorney for medical decisions in those last days. She coordinated with the clinic and arranged a service in one of the bigger chapels downtown. When I called the funeral director to confirm, he said, "Oh, I assumed she was the spouse." I didn't correct him. Not over the phone. Not yet. Instead, I called Denise. "Send the revised will," I said, and a letter to the funeral home and to Reverend Miles. There was a pause on her end. "Are you sure you want to do this, Elaine?" "I'm sure." I didn't want vengeance. I just wanted my name back in the room. Tiamal. I wore the navy lace dress Charlie bought me for the gala, the one I'd come home in alone that night while he laughed with Rachel over dessert. Funny thing, it fit better now. Not tighter, not looser, just stronger. My hair was pinned back. I wore a single strand of pearls and no wedding ring. I arrived before the service started, didn't take a seat in the front, didn't smile at anyone. I stood near the back, like I had the first time. Quiet, but steady. The pews filled quickly. Rachel arrived 20 minutes early, dressed in a sleek black dress, her curls pinned just so. Her makeup was tasteful, mournful. Even, she carried a white handkerchief and dabbed at her eyes as if preparing for a stage cue. People gathered around her, touched her back, whispered condolences. She nodded, gracious and sorrowful, playing the role she'd rehearsed. I watched her with a kind of detached curiosity. She didn't know what was coming. Reverend Miles stepped up to the podium. The chapel hushed. He cleared his throat, glanced down at the envelope I had handed him that morning, and then looked out over the congregation. "Before we begin today's service," he said, "there is something I've been asked to read at the request of Dr. Charles Porter's legal spouse, Elaine Porter." You could hear the air leave the room. Rachel froze in place. Heads turned, slow and uncertain. Reverend Miles opened the envelope. Inside was the will, the real one, the only one. He read, "All assets belonging to Charles M. Eamps, Porter, including but not limited to the Willow Creek Pediatric Clinic, financial accounts, personal property, and intellectual holdings are to be transferred in full to Elaine M. Porter." He looked up. This will, notarized and witnessed, was executed and filed prior to Dr. Porter's death. He folded the paper, paused. "Then let us begin." But the crowd didn't move. There was a ripple of shifting bodies, muffled whispers, heads turning back toward the front pew as Rachel's face had drained of all its careful blush. She looked stunned, lips parted, blinking too fast. She didn't cry, not now. Now, she looked exposed, and I hadn't moved. I let the silence stretch. Then I stepped forwards. Each step on the marble floor felt like a bell chime, not heavy, not light, just real. People turned toward me as I walked, not all with kindness, but not with pity either, with attention. That was all I'd ever wanted, to be seen. I reached the podium. Reverend Miles stepped aside. I didn't need notes. "My name is Elaine Porter," I said, "Charlie's wife of 42 years. The room listened. No coughs, no shuffling, just breath and tension. We built a life together. I continued, raised a daughter, built a home, shared jokes that stopped being funny and meals that became silent, and for a long time, I thought that was enough. I looked down at my hands, folded gently over the edges of the podium. But sometimes, you live a story that turns out to be only half true, and you don't see it until the end. I paused. I'm not here to tarnish anyone's memories. I know many of you saw a version of Charlie that was kind, generous, dependable. That man existed. He did. But he was also complicated. A few people shifted in their seats. Rachel sat stiffly, hands clenched in her lap, her face unreadable now. I loved him. I said simply, even when he stopped loving me back, even when he forgot who he used to be. Another pause. I let the words hang. Grief isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a woman sitting alone at her own kitchen table, wondering why her husband doesn't come home for dinner anymore. Sometimes it's dry toast for dinner and silence that lasts for days. Sometimes it's a necklace in the wrong hands. A quiet intake of breath rippled through the room. I met Rachel's eyes, held them. I'm not asking for your sympathy. I'm just reclaiming my space, because I was there. I was always there. I stepped away from the podium, heart steady, back straight. I didn't look back. I walked to the side aisle. Not the front row, not the back. I sat halfway down, where the light from the stained glass made the carpet glow, where I could still see the whole room. Reverend Miles continued the service. Rachel didn't speak. She didn't even stand when they asked if anyone would like to share memories. She kept her eyes fixed on the casket like it owed her something. When the final hymn ended, people filed out slowly. Some glanced at me, some nodded, some said nothing. But none of them looked through me. Not anymore. Outside, the air was cool and overcast. Claire met me on the sidewalk. She didn't ask how I was. She just offered her arms. And I took it. We walked back to the car together. Two women in navy and black, quiet but certain. And in that moment, I felt more like myself than I had in years. Not someone's wife, not someone's shadow, just me. The funeral buzz faded quickly. Rachel didn't come up to me afterward, didn't offer a hand or a nod. She slipped out through the side door, handkerchief clenched, heels clicking like an accusation. No dramatic exit, just a quiet retreat, like someone trying not to be seen on the wrong stage at the wrong time. I stayed behind, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. There's something about being the last person in a room that once held pain. It gives you a kind of closure no eulogy can offer. I walked up to Charlie's casket, stood there for a few long seconds. No words, no anger, just a slow, steady breath. Then I left, the doors of the chapel closing behind me with a soft thud that sounded, finally, like an ending. 3 days later, Tom Adler called. "Elaine," he said, his voice unusually tight. "We need to meet. There's something you'll want to see." We sat in his office, blinds drawn. He had the same manila folder from before, but this time it was thicker. "I've been digging through the clinic's ledgers," he began. Flipping it open, there are irregularities, significant ones. My fingers curled around the edge of my chair. He laid out pages, printouts of reimbursement reports, flagged expenses, and bank statements with highlighted charges, spa treatments, jewelry purchases, a weekend in Hudson Valley. All under Charlie's name, all paid for with clinic funds. "Rachel handled a lot of this," Tom said, "but here's the thing. She was never legally employed. Elliot never filed the final paperwork on her contract. She wasn't drawing an official salary. These reimbursements, technically fraudulent." I stared down at the pages. "She created her own expense line in the books," he added, "filed things under community outreach or executive support, but there's no trail, no oversight." He tapped the final page, and this is the kicker: she's been telling people she's owed severance. I raised an eyebrow. Severance from a job she never legally had. He nodded. "Exactly." I leaned back. It was strange how quiet my heart felt. No spike of rage. No rush of satisfaction. Just quiet clarities. "I'd like her removed immediately," I said. Tom looked relieved. "We can do that." Quietly, I added, "No press, no drama, just gone." He smiled faintly. Understood. Cool. 2 days later, Rachel was escorted out of the Willow Creek Pediatric Clinic. No police. No scene. Just a short meeting behind a closed door, a security guard by the exit, and a silent erasure. By sunset, her name was gone from the clinic's website. Her email address no longer worked. The framed photo of her and Charlie at the staff holiday party had disappeared from the front hallway. I didn't see her again. I didn't want to. Met. That same week, I made one more decision. I didn't want the clinic either. It held too many ghosts, Charlie's ambition, Rachel's lipstick on glassware. All the years I'd quietly smiled at fundraisers while something else brewed behind the scenes. I wanted a new story. One afternoon, over lemon scones and a pot of English breakfast tea, I met with a trio of young female doctors. They'd been trying to open a community-based pediatric practice for months, but were stuck in a pile of red tape and financing hurdles. I invited them to tour the clinic. Showed them every room, the waiting area I had painted once in soft blue, the little fish tank I used to clean when Charlie forgot, the break room with the crooked microwave. They walked through the building like it was a cathedral. When we reached the office, one of them turned to me. "This place has such good bones," she whispered. I smiled. "It does." I sold it to them for $1. They gasped, thought it was a joke. "It's not charity," I told them. "It's a clean start. Just promise me you'll make it yours." They cried. I didn't. After the paperwork was finalized, I walked to the clinic one last time. The sign still read, "Porter Pediatrics," but not for long. I stood outside, hand resting on the brick I once painted with Claire when she was 10. She got blue paint on her shoes and cried until I promised to buy her new ones. We never did. I whispered, "Goodbye," then turned and walked away. That evening, I stood on my porch with a glass of wine. The sky was pink and lavender, the kind of sunset that felt staged. The roses under the window were in full bloom, wide open, fragrant, unapologetically alive. Beneath them, the necklace stayed buried, not forgotten, just done. They That's the thing, no one tells you about betrayal. It doesn't always end with screaming or shattered plates. Sometimes it ends with paperwork and new paint and a dinner cooked just for yourself. Sometimes it ends with silence that finally feels earned. I wasn't seeking revenge. I didn't need to win. I just needed to stop losing myself. And maybe, in the end, that was the real reclamation. Not the will, not the clinic, but the decision to give myself back to me. It had been nearly 4 months since Charlie's funeral when Claire showed up again, this time with a shovel, a flat of marigolds, and 2 iced coffees. "You said we'd plant something," she said, holding up the tray like a peace offering. I smiled. "Let's do it." We worked quietly in the garden, the late spring sun warming our backs, the earth soft and fragrant. Claire hummed some tune I didn't recognize as we dug holes and pressed bright yellow petals into the ground. "Where's resilience?" she asked, looking toward the lilac bush we planted weeks ago. I pointed, still holding strong. "She's a fighter. She comes by it honestly." Claire smiled but didn't reply. Her hands were caked with soil. Her cheeks flushed from effort. She looked peaceful, like herself again, or maybe like someone new, maybe like me. After we washed up, we sat on the porch with our coffees and the sound of birds chirping in the hedge. "I've been thinking," Claire said, "about Dad." I took a slow sip, waiting. "I don't hate him," she continued, "even after everything. Isn't that weird?" "No," I said, "not weird at all. I love the version of him I knew, and I don't want to lose that just because, well, because there were other parts I didn't see. That version of him was real too," I said gently, "just not the whole picture." She looked at me, brows furrowed. "Do you hate him?" I thought about it, not in a dramatic way, just a quiet inventory of what remained. "No," I said finally, "but I've stopped waiting for the man I wanted him to be." Claire nodded slowly, her eyes glossy but dry. "That's fair." That evening, she helped me hang fairy lights along the fence. We had to reattach one hook twice because it kept slipping off the wood. When we finally got it, the little bulbs glowed in soft, golden strands across the yard. We sat beneath them with bowls of peach cobbler and watched the sky turn navy. Claire turned to me. "You ever think you'll fall in love again?" I laughed softly, with a mad. She grinned, with anyone or anything. I thought about my notebook, nearly half full now, my drawing of the coffee cup, the library's sign-up sheet with my name in bubble letters, the lilac, the girls running the clinic now, the way the soil felt in my hands. I think I already am. That night, after Claire left, I walked barefoot into the yard. The fairy lights swayed slightly in the breeze. The marigolds stood tall. The roses bloomed bold and wide. I knelt by the rose bush, that rose bush, and placed a hand gently on the soil. "I forgive you," I whispered. To Charlie, to myself, to all the versions of me I let go of to keep someone else comfortable. Then I stood up, dusted off my hands, and went inside. Bang! The next morning, I woke up with sunlight in my eyes and the smell of lavender from my bedside sachet. I made coffee strong, with cinnamon, and opened the kitchen window to let the breeze in. The world didn't feel new. It felt mine. I wrote in my notebook, "I was never the woman he chose in the end, but I'm the woman I would choose again and again." Then I underlined it twice. Found. I walked downtown later that week and passed the clinic. The new sign was up, "Willow Creek Child and Family Care." Bright blue letters, a rainbow graphic painted by one of the nurse's kids, through the front window. I saw a mother rocking a baby and a toddler dragging a dinosaur backpack behind him. It didn't sting. Not even a little. I crossed the street and kept walking, headed toward the library.
Chen.
At story hour, I read The Paper Bag Princess to a group of squirmy kindergartners. Cheryl winked from the front desk as I gave the dragon a big, booming voice and made a kid named Max laugh so hard he nearly fell off his beanbag. Afterward, a little girl with wild curls and missing front teeth came up and whispered, "You're really good at princess stories." I knelt down to her level. That's because I've lived one, with a twist. She giggled and skipped away. That night, I poured a glass of wine and curled up on the porch swing. The peace lily glowed in the twilight, and the fairy lights blinked on one by one. The breeze smelled like honeysuckle, and the silence, it didn't echo anymore. It rested. Like a blanket instead of a void. I wasn't rebuilding my life. I wasn't even recovering it. I was writing something new on clean pages, with my own handwriting, my own voice, and no apologies for the margins. This time, I didn't need someone else's last name to make the story matter. It mattered because it was mine. If you're still here, nestled under your blanket or lying in bed, thank you for walking with me through this story, through loss, through betrayal, through resilience. Sometimes the hardest endings are the quiet ones. They don't come with thunderclaps or slammed doors. They come with whispers, an unopened envelope, an untouched dinner, a pause in the middle of a sentence. And if you're not careful, those whispers can convince you that you don't matter anymore. But you do. Your voice, your presence, your tenderness. It all matters. This story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about getting even. It was about reclaiming breath, reclaiming choice, reclaiming a name you were never meant to lose. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you're there now, sitting at your own kitchen table, wondering when the world got so quiet, wondering if you disappeared somewhere along the way. But I promise you this, you can write yourself back in, with soft mornings and strong coffee, with paintbrushes and passwords you don't have to share, with fairy lights on fences and marigolds that bloom from stubborn soil. You don't need a dramatic beginning to start over. You just need one clear moment that says, "I'm still here." So breathe deep, light a candle, and know that it's never too late to become someone new, someone entirely your own.